Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Thursday, May 9th. Today is day 216, the 216th day since the attacks by Hamas on the south of Israel, since water, food, gas, and electricity was cut off from Gaza almost completely. And today, water, gas, and food and electricity continues to be a devastating challenge, where US officials have said in North Gaza a famine has already begun, and where literally every day food and water continues to be a challenge for the more than 2 million people living in Gaza. So what's the most significant things that have happened in the last day? The most significant thing is the question of whether or not Israel is going to have a full-on ground invasion into Rafah. What's happening in Rafah, the southernmost city? Earlier this week, Israel took control of the Rafah border between Gaza and Egypt. And we've been watching over the last several weeks as Netanyahu and the Israeli government have said that they have planned an Israeli offensive, that the Rafah invasion was looming. And now, in the face of global outrage and mounting humanitarian fears, it appears that this ground invasion is underway. Over the past couple of days, 100,000 people have been asked to evacuate a portion of the city of Rafah. The Rafah border crossing has been closed, although Israeli authorities have said that they will open Kerem Shalom. The question that aid groups have asked is, will that be enough? And even though the Kerem Shalom crossing is functional, whether or not aid would be allowed in. So more than 1 million Palestinians have already been displaced and have been in the city of Rafah. The city of Rafah has been a bit of a sanctuary, as if you could call it that. And so the big concern is a ground invasion can just have devastating effects. You know, I've said before that one Palestinian said to me, if you throw a rock, that Rafah is so populated that a rock would hit 10 people. Already the death toll in Gaza is more than 34,500 people. It's approaching now 35,000 people. And so what does a ground invasion of Rafah mean? Netanyahu has said that Rafah has to be invaded in order for him to accomplish his goals of eradicating Hamas. Others have said Hamas is an ideology, it will never be eradicated. And so here is, you know, this great tension. The crossing area, UNRWA has said that now Rafah has become a central point for military operations, that it's an active war zone. This was just said yesterday by Louise Wateridge. She's a spokesperson for UNRWA. She said, we're hearing continued bombardments in the area around Rafah throughout the day. She said no fuel or aid has entered into the Gaza Strip, and this is disastrous for the humanitarian response. All the fuel that entered Gaza went through the Rafah crossing, according to the president of Refugees International. He said that at a briefing yesterday. The whole aid operation runs on fuel. If fuel gets cut off, it means that all humanitarian operations collapse. Water will not be able to be pumped. Lights will not go on in the very few hospitals that are operational at all. Vehicles will not be able to distribute aid. With the crossing there being closed, the entire humanitarian operation will be compromised, said UNICEF. If the crossing is not urgently reopened, the entire civilian population in Rafah and the Gaza Strip will be at an even greater risk of famine, disease, and death. Human Rights Watch said yesterday that Israel was contravening legally binding orders from the Court of Justice by obstructing the entry of life-saving aid. You know, the order that came from the ICJ in March, according to Human Rights Watch, is being ignored. Israeli authorities continue to obstruct basic services, the entry of fuel and life-saving aid, and right now, some humanitarian groups are saying that this is a war crime that is being used to starve civilians as a weapon of war. The current Israeli push elicited an exasperated response from the UN Secretary General Guterres, who said, haven't the civilians of Gaza suffered enough death and destruction? Make no mistake, a full-scale assault on Rafah would be a human catastrophe. Now, this is quite significant. President Biden last night on CNN said that he will cut off offensive weapons to Israel if it invades Rafah. So US weapons have been used to kill civilians in Gaza. Biden acknowledged yesterday for the first time. He said a full-scale invasion of the crowded city would kill many more. The president, in comments to CNN, used his strongest language yet In seeking to deter Israel's planned full-scale invasion of the Gazan city, he acknowledged that American bombs have killed innocent Palestinians. The Biden administration postponed, this is a separate issue, but they postponed the delivery of the report that was due to Congress. That is a requirement of the Presidential Security Memorandum 20. This delay came as the Israeli forces are continuing their incursion in Rafah, even as President Biden has said more has to be done to protect civilians. The Biden administration did last week pause a shipment of weapons to Israel in opposition to this plan about Rafah. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin became the first senior U.S. official to confirm the pause. He told a Senate committee, "We're currently reviewing some near-term security assistance in the context of unfolding events on Rafah." AIPAC responded to this and called on Congress to reverse the decision. They want the bombs to be shipped to Israel. They say that this delay emboldens Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah. An Israeli official told NBC News that Israel is deeply frustrated by the decision, and Israel's envoy to the U.S., Gilad Ardan, said the decision is very disappointing. Now, Israel has promised to open Kerem Shalom. They said yesterday that it had reopened Kerem Shalom crossing. Now, I was told by contacts on the ground that the crossing is operational, but that humanitarian assistance has not yet been going through Kerem Shalom. It has been the main aid conduit. According to some news sources, 2 senior American officials said recently, this is speaking about Samantha Power of U.S. Aid, that famine had already begun in North Gaza, and that is contributed to and caused largely by the strict controls of aid that are being imposed by Israel. That began after October 7th, when food, fuel, and medicine have been significantly limited. The challenge has been that human rights organizations don't think now that it's safe, even if Kerem Shalom is open, that because of the bombings in Rafah, that human aid organizations don't think it's safe to allow workers to go in to be able to distribute aid. So that's quite significant. If Israel's to reopen Kerem Shalom or to use it, the concern is how much aid will be allowed in. There also has been this idea that perhaps the attacks on the part of Rafah that have begun so far were in retaliation because 4 soldiers were killed earlier this week by rocket fire and mortars from Gaza. Analysts have been saying that some of the bombing of Rafah that has happened thus far was a retaliatory attack in response to the killing of those soldiers. And so that's some of what's been reported in the news. In terms of in the US and protests on college campuses, one of the campuses that police had not responded to was in Washington, D.C., the George Washington University protests. And D.C. last night just cleared that protest encampment. Overnight, the district mayor and police cleared, had ordered for the encampment to be cleared. They were supposed to testify today on Thursday on Capitol Hill about why they had for nearly 2 weeks declined requests from the university to do so. So that was significant. And then a side note on the DC political scene is that President Biden's Iran envoy, his name was Robert Malley, he's been sidelined for the past year. And there was a question in the news about why that is. And there was an opinion piece by a journalist in the Washington Post where it just came out that Malley, who was appointed in 2021 to have back channel talks with Iran, he was placed on leave and had his security clearance suspended in April of 2023. On Monday, top Republicans from the Senate Foreign Relations and House Foreign Affairs Committees sent a letter, which was obtained by the Washington Post, to Secretary Blinken, which decried the lack of information about this investigation. And the letter asked the State Department to confirm why the security clearance was suspended. And they said because he allegedly had transferred classified documents to personal emails and downloaded documents to his personal cell phone. And so through leaks in the Tehran Times, an Iranian state-controlled media outlet, it had already been reported that Malley was under federal investigation for potentially mishandling classified documents. So that was a side piece of news related to the US. So I'm in Johannesburg the next couple of days. I'll try to give some updates about what's happening here with some Palestinian leaders, some South African leaders, with the South African Council of Churches. We will continue to call for a comprehensive ceasefire. Please pray for peace. Please continue to work for an end to all violence, the release of hostages, that there might be an alternative to violence and war as we continue in our efforts towards peace. Thank you for your prayers. Thank you for your continued work.